Speaker.
The Reverend Dr. David Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I mean, there's got to be some irony in the previous member getting up and decrying the government's broadband system. They've spent nearly $300 million, and the member opposite, who is a government member, is saying it is appalling. And she's right. She's right. That's the kind of confession from a government that is so out of touch, it thinks it can tell New Zealanders it's spending $300 million of their money and deliver no result. That is what we have opposite. Honestly, this is reaching a ridiculous standard. But Mr. Speaker, I didn't want to speak about that. I'm going to turn into Mr. Squeaker myself. What I wanted to talk about was a contribution from the Honourable Amy Adams, the woman in charge of this bill. The Minister said in her speech introducing the bill, and I read it here, "The industry will not need to put their prices up or explain to their customers why their bill is changing." Those are words from the Minister's mouth. Let me read them again. "The industry will not need to put their prices up or explain to their customers why their bill is changing." Well, Mr. Speaker, we've learnt during the debate that the big provider Spark is going to put up its bills, and it's going to do it in a transparent way so that people know how much the government is charging extra for this broadband service. They are going to put up their levies, and they are saying now the government has confirmed it will continue rather than reduce as they originally legislated. It will put upward pressure on future costs, and they will have to pass that cost through to their broadband and on-account mobile customers. And they're exploring options for adding this cost in a transparent way to customers' monthly statements so they understand the contribution they are making to the government's Telecommunications Development Levy Fund. And that cost is going to be borne by every business, broadband and mobile customer, and that will be across all of the firms. And that is because this government is so determined to ram this through that they haven't consulted on the legislation. They're just going to impose a new tax on all New Zealanders who are interested in using these kind of internet services. That is what this government does because it is so out of touch. It is breaking its promises. It had those promises, of course, that we remember, that this government would return to a surplus. That was their big promise, their central promise in their last election campaign. Well, we found out yesterday we were told to wait. We were told to wait for the surprise. Well, the surprise was no surprise. For the 7th time in a row, this government has failed to deliver a surplus. They keep promising it. They keep promising it. Always jam tomorrow. The wage rises, they've broken that promise. They said they'd deliver 7,000 increases by 2016. Well, now they're saying those increases won't be delivered till 2019. They're leaving it to the next government to deliver the wage increases, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that cannot keep its word any longer. They did it with the GST increase. If we think back, John Key said there will be no increase in GST, and then, lo and behold, once he was elected, up it went to 15%. That was at the same time, of course, as they delivered those tax cuts to the very wealthiest New Zealanders, while middle New Zealand is struggling every day, going out to work, trying to pay the bills, but getting behind because this government does not have their concerns at heart. It only has at heart the interests of the 1%, the very, very elite, those who have the capital from a previous generation. That's all they're interested in serving. They are not interested in the people that go out every day and work hard to try and get ahead, to try and look out for their families. Well, on this side of the house we are. On this side of the house we are. And we are upset that they have broken their promises because they were elected on those promises. They were elected on the promise of a surplus. They were elected on the promise of increasing wages, and now they are not delivering. They said they'd introduce no new taxes. We've had 3 in this budget. We've had 3 in this budget. And I'll read again from the departmental disclosure statement that the department put out that the minister will have seen. And it says, are there in this bill any changes in the nature of a tax? 4.2, does the bill create or amend a power to impose a fee, levy or charge in the nature of a tax? And in big, bold capitals, it says next to that, yes. Yes, this is in the nature of a tax. And now we hear that the telecommunications providers are going to pass it on to their consumers. And that makes a lie of what the minister said. The minister said the industry will not need to put up their prices or explain to their customers why their bill is changing. Well, this is a government that is so out of touch. It thinks it can introduce a new tax after saying it won't. It thinks it can say that surplus is its central promise and then not deliver on it. It thinks it can say wages will go up for hard-working New Zealanders and then not deliver. And we learnt yesterday, of course, that working for families is going to go down for many families in middle New Zealand. They are going to be further behind. Sure, it is really good that beneficiaries are getting a little bit extra, but it shouldn't be the case that that little bit extra is taken out of the pockets of those who are just a couple of rungs further up the ladder. That is not fair. New Zealanders know that's not fair, and they know that these promises are promises that have been broken. This is a government that can no longer be trusted to keep their word. Mr. Speaker, this is an appalling state of affairs, and New Zealanders will be rightly upset about it. And we know, of course, that Internet New Zealand has called for a review. They came to Select Committee yesterday and they said it would be really helpful. They said it would be really helpful if the government or the Select Committee or anybody actually would take a lead on investigating what's happened with the Rural Broadband Initiative Part 1. That's what they said. They said some leadership would be great. Let's see whether it worked or not. Let's see, when you spend $300 million as a government, whether there's any effect.
That's right, fair enough.
The government is not interested. It's not interested. It doesn't want to be held to account anymore. It can spend hundreds of millions. It doesn't need to account to the taxpayers or the voters. That's how out of touch they are. That's how far removed from the truth. And that government over there will reap the public displeasure as the public see their bills go up for this rural broadband initiative while many of them can't access it. Well, Mr. Speaker, the other thing I want to say is that I recently read that Ashburton has one of the best rural broadbands in the country. I've been to Ashburton. It's not that good. If that is the best that this government can deliver, it is appalling. New Zealanders deserve better than that. Now they're throwing more money at it, but they're not going to test whether it's actually getting to where it needs to get to. My colleague Claire Curran has calculated that for every connection that's been made so far, it's around $7,000 that the government has forked in. Are New Zealanders feeling better off for that $7,000? Well, they're actually going to be charged extra on top of that, about another $1 a month for every kind of connection. If they've got a business connection or a personal connection, that's what they are facing now because new taxes are being introduced by this government. It is a government out of ideas that is breaking its own promises and doesn't have a plan. It has not articulated how it is going to increase exports. It's promised an increase to 40% of GDP. Well, actually, under its watch, it's going backwards. It used to be 30%. It's going backwards. And the Treasury predicts that it will go backwards further. That next year, exports as a percentage of GDP will drop further. They're becoming a smaller portion of the economy under this government. It's no wonder that fewer small businesses are starting under this government. It is a government without ideas. It's determined to carry on with the commodity price cycles, and it thinks that is the only answer. Well, it's not. We need vision, we need aspiration, and we need a government that will keep its word. We need a government that will be keeping its word, that will actually deliver on the promises it makes. And this government seems determined not to do that. It's so out of touch, it thinks it doesn't even need to answer to New Zealanders. It can introduce a tax and then say, not our problem. It can reduce working for families, for hard-working Kiwi families, and say, not our problem. This is a government that is out of touch and out of ideas. It's brushed off. We learned also a housing idea from the Labor government, but it hasn't done the research. We saw in the budget documents yesterday, $52 million in a contingency. When I worked at Treasury, things that went in a contingency were things that hadn't been thought through yet, that couldn't be quantified from a government that hadn't done its work. It was responding to the polling in the last minute. It set up a contingency and said, we'll do something about housing. We've got to do something. The polls are telling us it's a real issue. 6 years on, having done nothing, they put a little bit of money to one side. It's going to be a long time before that solution gets implemented. This government's out of ideas. It's got no long-term plan. It's a government that's breaking promises left, right and centre, and it will be held to account.
Brett Hudson.
Mr. Speaker, for the edification of the member who's just resumed his seat, the Telecommunications Development Levy exists today.